The rain streaked down the big living room windows, smudging the glow of the string lights they'd hung for their wedding 3 short days before. Lila Marlowe still wore the soft, cream-colored loungewear she'd picked out for her newlywed days, a small silver wedding band glinting on her left hand. For 72 hours, she had let herself sink into the fairy tale feeling. The messy wedding planning was behind them. The guests had gone home. All that was left was building a quiet, good life with Ethan Voss, the man she'd thought knew every corner of her heart. But tonight, the warm bubble popped completely. They had been going over wedding receipts spread across the coffee table, crumpled invoices and credit card statements stacked between half-empty mugs of cold coffee. What had started as calm discussion about over-budget vendor charges slowly curdled into sharp, biting words. Ethan's jaw tightened, his voice rising as he tapped angrily at a receipt for the reception venue. He kept circling the final number, repeating how much money they had wasted, how his savings had been gutted for a party that was now nothing but memory. "I told you we should have scaled back," Ethan snapped, leaning forward on the couch. His tone was sharp, the easy charm everyone else knew vanishing fast. "You wanted all those extra flowers, the upgraded dinner plate. None of this was cheap. Now we are stuck paying this off for years." Lila sat back, her shoulders tense. "We agreed on every single one of those choices together. This wasn't only my call. You said you wanted the day to feel special for both of us." He laughed, the sound hollow in the small townhouse. "Special means drowning in debt before we've even gotten started as husband and wife." The argument spiraled faster than Lila could keep up. Every point she tried to make got twisted back on her. He blamed her for overspending, blamed her for pushing for things she supposedly did not do. She tried to de-escalate, telling him they could sit down and make a payment plan, that fighting would not fix the... But her calm only seemed to fuel his frustration. His face flared red, his hands balling tight at his... Lila felt a cold prickle of warning crawl up her spine. She had seen flashes of this temper during small moments he'd always apologized for, moments she had brushed off as stress. This was different. This rage was raw and unfiltered. "Stop talking," Ethan bit out, standing from the couch. His shadow stretched long across the carpet under the over... "You listen. You just keep making..." "Ethan, sit back down. Let's do this," Lila said, pushing herself slowly to her feet. She took one small step backward, putting more The hair on the back of her stood up. Some old buried memory flamed. Her Robert, years ago in the backyard, walking her through basic self... "Just in case life throws something at you. I hope you never need it, but know how to protect yourself if you do." Back then, it had felt like a strange, overly cautious hobby. Right now, those lessons felt terribly relevant. "Sit." He closed the distance in 2 strides. Before Lila could say another word, he back. Hit her. Instinct took over before think it. All those old backyard drills kicked in. She dodged the wild swing, raised her arms to block, and reacted with the defensive moves her father had drilled in. There was a loud, heavy collision of bodies. Ethan lost his balance. He stumbled backward, tripped over the edge of the coffee table, and crashed hard. A sharp crack through the living room. One of the table's wooden corners caught his forearm on the way down. A raw, bleeding gash split along his skin. Pain roared out of him in a shout. Books and loose receipts went lying across the floor. Downstairs, through thin shared floorboards, Mrs. Rita Gomez heard every bit of the yelling, the scuffling footsteps, crash. She paused her television show and tilted her head toward the ceiling, fast. Lila stood frozen, her chest heaving, adrenaline screaming body. Her hands were shaking. Not planned to hurt him. She had only been getting struck. But blood was already seeping down Ethan's arm onto their light-colored area rug. He up at her from the floor, burning with rage, not shame. "Did this to me," he snarled, voice thick with pain and fury. Lila stared at the blood, at the wedding still on her finger, at the destroyed remains of their perfect newlywed evenings on the floor. This was not the marriage she had imagined. This was not the man she had said "I do" prior. Before she could form any kind of reply, Ethan grabbed her beside him. His finger fumbled, but he managed to dial. He spoke fast, voice trembling, painting himself as the injured victim. Lila realized with cold dread calling the police. The faint sound of distant sirens started to hum somewhere far urban street. They were getting closer. Way to smooth this over. No way to pretend none of it had happened. Whatever life she had thought she was building with Ethan was uttered beyond repair. The wail of sirens grew louder until the patrol car's blue and red light spilled through the rain-streaked windows, painting swirling streaks across the blood-stained area rug. 2 uniformed officers stepped out into the damp driveway, boots crunching on wet gravel. Lila heard the knock at the front door, sharp and authoritative, and her stomach twisted into tight knots. Ethan was still sitting on the floor, pressing a crumpled paper towel hard against the bleeding gash on his forearm. He had already calmed his shouting, shifting into a quiet, wounded tone that made him sound fragile and wronged. Lila unlocked the front door. Cold, damp air rushed inside, mixing with the stale tension hanging in the living room. One officer stepped over the threshold, eyes scanning the disarray, scattered receipts, overturned books, the coffee table nicked at its corner, the faint smear of red on the rug. Ethan lifted his injured arm the second he saw them, wincing like every small movement brought sharp agony. "He's my husband," Lila started, her voice unsteady from leftover adrenaline. "We got into an argument. He tried to hit me. I defended myself." Ethan shook his head slowly before she could say more. His expression was pained, reasonable, the charming mask Lila knew so well sliding back into place. "I understand why it looks confusing. We had a fight over wedding finances. Things got heated." She lashed out physically. "I never raised a hand. I was just trying to de-escalate." The officers separated them right away, taking Ethan onto the front porch for questioning while Lila stayed inside the living room. Standing alone amid the mess, doubt began to creep. Had she overreacted? Could she have found another way to step back without a physical clash? The memory of his swinging arm replayed behind her eyes, but Ethan's smooth retelling planted tiny seeds of uncertainty. She pulled out her phone and fired off quick text messages to her best friend Mia and her parents. Typing fast, hands trembling so badly she misspelled half her. Downstairs, Officer Hale went to speak with Rita. The elderly neighbor stood in her apartment doorway, wrapped in a knit. She admitted she'd heard loud yelling and a heavy crash from the unit, but she had not seen anything through the ceiling. She could not confirm who had started the violence, only that the noise had turned vicious very. That neutral, non-committal statement landed in the official police report, and Lila's heart sank when the officer. Without an eyewitness who had seen the swing, it was Lila's word against. 20 minutes later, Mia pulled up in her beat-up sedan, headlights cutting through. She rushed inside, wrapped Lila in a tight hug, her nurse's gaze flicking over Lila's body, checking for bruises. Not long after Lila's arrived, Robert marched straight into the house, scanning the room, his jaw tight with surprise. Carol's eyes filled with tears the moment she spotted the blood carpet. She kept glancing toward the front porch, where Ethan sat receiving basic first aid from an officer, still playing the hurt. Carol pulled Lila aside for a quick moment, voice soft. "Marriages hit terrible fights this early times. Could this be something you two can work through? You just..." Lila felt a hollow ache in her chest. Her mother was not minimizing her fear. She was grieving the beautiful future they had all celebrated only 3 days before. Robert cut in firmly. "Working through it stops when someone tries to punch. That line doesn't." Back out on the porch, Ethan overheard fragments of the conversation. When the officers finished doctoring his injury, he stood inside, his arm wrapped in a temporary bandage. His polite public persona dropped the second law enforcement prepared to leave. He listened to Lila, low enough only she could hear, his verb. "This ends tonight," he murmured. "You've got no solid proof. I will fight every single step. You will reacted." The patrol car pulled away, taillights vanishing down the wet street. The official report listed conflicting accounts. No immediate arrests. No clear winner, no simple resolution. But the fairy tale newlywed chapter was completely burned away. Lila stood surrounded by her family, staring at the man she had married, realizing this con far from over. Whatever happened next, it would not be fixed with a simple apology or a calm conversation. Morning light filtered through gray overcast skies, washing over the townhouse where Lila had spent only 3 short days as a wife. Ethan slept in the master bedroom behind a closed door, his gauze-wrapped forearm resting on top of the covers. Layla had not closed her eyes all night. She sat on the edge of the guest bedroom bed, phone balanced in her lap, rereading the police report the officer had emailed over. Conflicting statements. No independent witness who saw the first blow. Every line reminded her how fragile her position really was. Mia showed up at 8 o'clock, carrying hot coffee and a stack of printed resources for domestic violence support. She sat down beside Lila on the bed and pushed a family law attorney's business card across the comforter. "You cannot keep living under this roof with him," Mia said, her tone steady. "Even if he does not lash out physically again, the intimidation alone will eat you alive. Filing for a restraining order is not about punishing him. It is about creating legal space so you can breathe." Lila stared at the card, her throat tight. To file the petition would make everything permanent. It would turn their messy private fight into official court records. All their wedding guests, mutual friends, distant relatives would hear whispers about what had happened. People would take sides. Some would believe Ethan's version of events, that she had viciously attacked her new husband for nothing. The shame of a marriage collapsing 72 hours after the ceremony weighed heavy on her chest. Her parents arrived an hour later. Robert sat at the small dining room table, scrolling through support group forums on his phone, already researching local legal. Carol lingered by the window, picking at the edge of a tablecloth, her voice. What if he genuinely feels remorse? Carol. People snap under. Couples go to counseling. They work through terrible fights, throwing everything away this fast. It feels so. Robert up, his expression gentle but unyielding. Remorse starts with taking responsibility for lifting. He has not. Last night he threatened her. Do you really want our daughter gambling with her safety, hoping he might change? The tension hung thick between her mother. Lila could feel both of theirs. Her mother grieved the wedding, dreams, the family. Her father grieved her for the danger she faced. Lila closed her eyes for a long moment, and then she would meet Winnie. She would file. By afternoon, Lila sat across from Kara Bennett in a cramped downtown consultation. The attorney walked her through every section of the restraining petition, explaining what evidence would need, what questions the. As Lila recounted the night's events, Kara paused and heard. These kinds of cases often reveal patterns. Has anything similar come up with Ethan's partners? Kara asked, her head. During their dating years, Ethan had spoken briefly about two ex-friends, framing both breakup messy, blaming them for being unreasonable, and she had accepted his telling of the time. Now, tiny, forgotten red flags flickered by memory. Cancelled dates after arguments, old social media posts had deleted, vague warnings from one distant acquaintance she had brushed off. Back at the house that evening, Ethan's smear campaign was already underway. Lila watched her cat blow up. Mutual wedding guests were texting one another, relaying his account. That Lila had flown into an unprovoked violent rage over wedding bills, that he was the wounded victim struggling to edge. Several people messaged Lila direct, confused. Some even actions. When Ethan found out she assaulted a lawyer, his temper flared again, though he kept his voice controlled. Careful not to give neighbors new reason to call police, he paced the living room. His bandaged arm walked. You are weaponizing the legal system because you lost a stupid argument, he said coldly. All of our friends will see who you really are. Did not argue. She packed a duffel bag with clothes, important documents, her laptop and medication. She would stay at her parents' for the time being. The townhouse leased their signatures, but it no longer qualified her. That night, sitting in her childhood bedroom, Lila scrolled old social media profiles, digging through faded public posts. A throwaway comment from one of Ethan's partners caught her eye, buried deep beneath years of contempt. It was cryptic, direct accusations, but it described the exact same cycle of charm followed by terrifying anger that she had just lived through. The words sat down her spine. This might not have been an overnight mistake. The petition for restraining order sat open on her laptop screen, her signature. Signing it would set the whole legal process in motion, turning back. Whatever happened next, the quiet newlywed life she had dreamed of was gone for good. Lila woke up in her childhood bedroom, sheets smelling like the lavender laundry detergent her mother had used for decades. Physically, she was safe, but her phone kept buzzing nonstop, carrying the fallout from Ethan's whispering campaign. Most of their mutual wedding guests had only ever seen his warm, easygoing side. To them, Lila was the woman who had turned on her husband 3 days after the ceremony. Some texts were gentle, confused requests for her side of the story. Many others were sharp, judgmental messages. One old college acquaintance wrote that marriage fights went both ways, that she should think twice before destroying Ethan's reputation over a bad evening. Lila kept deleting the threads, yet new messages kept popping up. The isolation pressed heavier with every passing hour. Mia stayed in constant contact, checking in multiple times a day, but Mia existed outside their shared friend circle. Inside that group, support for Lila was thin. There was one woman, Jordan, who had been friends with both of them throughout their 2-year relationship. Lila clung to the hope Jordan would stay neutral, maybe even stand with her. Jordan had been a bridesmaid at the wedding. They had stayed up late drinking wine during bachelorette weekend, talking about trust and loyalty. Lila decided to ask her to meet at a local coffee shop, hoping for a safe person to confide. The afternoon sun filtered through cafe windows as Lila sat across from Jordan, paper coffee cup growing cold in her hands. She held nothing. She described the screaming fight, the way Ethan reared back to strike, her father taught self-defense reflex, the conflicting police statement. She admitted her own that people would never believe her version of events. She spoke honestly about the cryptic old social media comment she had, wondering whether Ethan's anger was a repeated pattern. Jordan listened quietly, nodding now and then, her expression soft and sympathetic. Lila left the coffee shop feeling convinced at least one person within their group understood. Less than 2 hours later, Mia called her in a panic. Jordan had relayed every private detail of that coffee shop conversation straight. He now had a full play-by-play of Lila's, her legal plans, and the faint lead about his ex-girlfriend. Betrayal burned hot inside Lila's chest. She had lowered guard, and that confidence had been weaponized. Jordan sent a short follow-up text later at night, saying she felt obligated to hear both sides, that she could not pick favorites. To Lila, it read like a clean excuse for handing her vulnerability over to the man. Money became Ethan's goal. The credit card they had opened jointly to cover wedding expenses was suddenly frozen. Lila logged into her banking app and saw the notification up. Ethan had contacted the issuer, claimed suspected fraudulent activity, and locked. Every vendor bill still sat unpaid. Legally, both of their credit scores would suffer if those balances went delinquent. He sent her a short, cold, "Work with me to settle that, or we both take the fight." He was using shared debt to coerce her into dropping the restraining order. Lila sat at her parents' kitchen table, scrolling through balances, her stomach twisting. She had her own full-time salary, but she had not budgeted for sudden, unexpected joint debt chaos only days. Robert sat down beside her and walked her through what they had warned. Financial pressure was a... She must not cave out of fear of credit. While this unfolded, that partial social media snippet from Ethan's ex-girlfriend started getting passed around privates. It was a 2-year-old comment, vague, no names, clear timeline. It said, "Charm can have something ugly. Be careful who you let close. Some people only show you their rage behind." No names were mentioned, so half the people reading it had no clue who it referenced. Others connected. A small number of mutual friends messaged Lila asking if this post related. Others sent screenshots to Ethan. He fired back messages calling the ex-partner unstable, claiming she had manufactured drama makeup. He framed the old post as old, meaningless drama from a jilted. Lila stared at the screen. The fragment gave her a bit of truth, but it was far from solid proof. It could be easily dismissed as petty partner gossip. She could not build her whole restraining order case around one cryptic line. Alone in the kitchen long after her went to bed, Lila realized just how it was. Most of the people she and Ethan had built their social life with outside. Her private connections were not safe. Their shared finances were being used as leverage against her. That faint hint of his pattern existed, was incomplete. Credit. She still planned to move forward with the restraining order hearing, but the road ahead looked far lonelier than she had imagined when she first seen the court paperwork. The incomplete social media comment sat on her phone screen, and she wondered what else Ethan had buried from his past that uncovered. 3 days slipped by in a blur of legal preparation and restless nights. Lila spent most evenings at her parents' dining room table, sorting screenshots, text threads, and police report documents into folders for attorney Kara Bennett. Every document felt fragile. The cryptic social media comment from Ethan's ex-girlfriend was still easy for Ethan to dismiss as bitter hearsay. Without something more concrete, it would barely register in front of a judge. Kara called one Tuesday afternoon with unexpected news. The ex-girlfriend, whose name was Marissa, had reached out to the law office. She would not appear in court and refused direct contact with Lila, but she agreed to a recorded phone conversation with the attorney only. Lila sat quiet in the corner of Kara's office while the call played over speakerphone. Marissa's voice was tight and cautious. She described dating Ethan for nearly 18 months 4 years earlier. At first he had been thoughtful and romantic, exactly the charming man Lila had known. Then the cycle shifted. Small disagreements would ignite into towering rages. He never struck her physically, but he would slam furniture, scream for hours, trap her inside rooms until she backed down and apologized for arguments that were never her fault. When she finally ended the relationship, he spread stories painting her as irrational and emotionally unstable to all their shared friends. "I never told anyone the full truth," Marissa said over the speaker. "I just wanted to get away and rebuild my life. I saw the whispers online about what happened with Lila, and I could not stay silent entirely. But I cannot put my own life on the line by testifying publicly." When the call ended, Lila leaned back in the office chair, cold shock settling over her bones. So much of it lined up. All those little moments she had brushed off during her own 2-year romance with Ethan flooded back to her mind. The night he smashed a beer bottle after a work set, The time he blocked her car in the driveway following a petty. The apologies that always came afterward, soft and remorseful, promising it would never happen again. Back then, she had written every incident off as stress, bad days, temporary mishaps. She had wanted so badly to believe in the man who brought her flowers and planned their perfect. She had ignored red flag after red flag, blinded by the future she was desperate. That realization stung almost as badly as the night of the attack. It forced her to confront a painful truth. She had not just married a man who snapped once. She had married someone with a well-established pattern, and she had chosen not. Kara warned her that Marissa's recorded statement had strict. The woman would not take the witness stand. A judge might treat the account as background context, not hard admissible proof for the restraining order petition. Lila could not build her whole case. They still needed witness testimony that would hold up inside the courtroom. That evening, as dusk settled over the townhouse complex, Lila drove back to. She did not go upstairs to the unit she had. Instead, she knocked gently on Rita Gomez's ground floor apartment. The elderly neighbor answered, wearing the same knit cardigan from the night event. At first she hated, unsure if she should go further, but Lila softly, explaining how high the stakes were, how everything rested on what had been heard through those. Rita let her. The small apartment smelled of chamomile tea and old books. She sat down on her worn fabric sofa and admitted she had held information back from the response. Fear of getting dragged into conflict had made her hold back. She had not only heard shouting and a crash through floorboards, she could distinguish voice clearly enough. She had heard Ethan raise first. She had heard him advance across the room, heavy footsteps passed. Then came the scuffle, the impact, and roar. She had heard no aggression from Lila until after he had. I told the police I couldn't know who started it, Rita said quietly. That was not really honest. I was afraid of retaliation, of being pulled into a young couple's brutal fight, but I cannot keep carrying this secret. If I am called, I will go to court and tell it heard. A weight lifted from Lila's shoulders. This was tangible, used witness testimony. Rita was prepared for a judge. The next morning, Kara emailed a fit paperwork. The restraining order hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks away. The date was printed in stark black text on top of the document. There was no more delaying. No. Lila left the law office and walked out onto the sidewalk. Rain threatened overhead, clouds hanging low. Marissa's anonymous account laid out Ethan's repeating pattern. Rita was willing to give real witness testimony. Still, huge uncertainty hung over everything. Ethan remained persuasive. He would twist every detail, paint himself as the newlywed husband. There was no guarantee that favor. As she climbed into her car, her phone lit up with a new number. A short, unsettling to her screen. You are digging up old, stay buried. They'll not turn out the way you hope. Lila stared at the words, fingers going cold. Ethan was sending warnings, asked his identity. The battle was growing sharper, and she was heading straight toward the most dangerous of the whole ordeal. The unknown text lingered on Lila's phone screen long after she'd locked the device, the words burning into her memory. She knew it was Ethan. No one else had enough reason to warn her off digging into his past. No one else had that quiet, menacing edge in their tone. She didn't reply. She didn't need to. The message was already doing its job, planting paranoia, making her second-guess every move she'd made to protect herself. The 2 weeks leading up to the restraining order hearing crashed over her like a relentless storm, each day stacking a new weight on her shoulders. At work, she could barely focus on scheduling patient appointments or filing clinic paperwork. Her hands shook mid-task, her mind constantly drifting back to the upcoming court date, to Marissa's hidden testimony, to Rita's hesitant promise to speak the truth. Co-workers noticed her quiet exhaustion, the way she skipped lunch breaks to sit in her car and review court documents, but she kept the full chaos to herself. Explaining her broken 3-day marriage and the violence that ended it would only invite more whispers, more sideways glances, more of the judgment she'd already endured from their friend group. Her family's quiet divide also widened, chipping away at the safe haven she'd found at her parents' home. Carol could not let go of the grief of what could have been. Each evening, she'd pull up wedding photos on her phone, Lila and Ethan grinning under string lights. The first dance, the family toasts, and sigh soft, voice thick with sorrow. It was such a beautiful day, she'd say, almost to herself. 2 years of planning, all that hope, gone in one bite. Maybe a judge will order counseling. Maybe he can learn to control his temper. People change. Robert would overhear and shut it down gently but firmly, his tone sharp with protective frustration. Change doesn't start with throwing a fist. Change starts with accountability. And he's never once taken responsibility for what he did. You can't beg a man to be safe. Lila was caught in the middle, torn between her mother's desperate longing for normalcy and her father's unwavering focus on her survival. Some nights the exhaustion. She found herself entertaining the terrible coward. What if I drop? What if I cancel hearing, apologize for overreacting, and try to fix marriage? The shame of a failed wedding wishing. The social clash. The frozen shared card. The endless stream of passive-aggressive texts from mutual. It all felt heavier than the fear of facing. Ethan sensed her wavering, and he pressed his advantage. He stopped sending angry threats and switched to a carefully crafted act of remorse. He texted her long, apologetic graphs, claiming he'd been consumed by Wes, that he'd never meant to scare her, that he'd spent every night replaying their fight and regretting his rage. He promised marriage counseling, promised to fix their differences, promised to be the gentle, loving husband he'd married. He even sent a photo of their bouquet, dried and preserved on their shelf, a quiet manipulation designed to tug at. For 48 hours, Lila teetered on the edge. She missed the fiercely, the quiet suburban life, the mornings, the future they'd met. She hated being the divorced bride after only 3 marriage, hated being the friend who ruined a perfect love story in every. Mia was the one who pulled her back. She showed up at the house with takeout rainy night, sat beside Lila on the porch, and cut through every excuse. "You're not scared of the marriage," said bluntly. "You're scared of admitting you're wrong about him. Scared of looking foolish. But foolish is choosing to go back to a man who tried to hurt you just to save face." The words stung, but they landed true. Lila cried then, not just for marriage, but for the version of herself that had believed fairy tales, that had ignored every red flag, that had spent 2 years loving a man. Same night, Ethan made a mistake, one that stripped away every last bit of mercy. Lila accidentally butt-dialed him while venting quietly in the car. She didn't realize it 10 minutes later, when she checked her phone and call. She froze, listening in silence as Ethan spoke to his best friend on the other line, his tone cold, arrogant. "She's cracking," he told his friend, a edge in his voice. "She's too embarrassed to follow through order. Give it a few more days and she'll drop the whole thing. Once this blows over, she'll fall back in line. She always does. Over-emotional, dramatic. She overreacted to a simple fight, and now she's proud to admit it." He laughed, sound. "Not changing anything. She's the one who plays." Lila ended the call with shaking hands, her chest hollow and cold. All his apologies, all his promises, all his remorse, every had been a lie. Regretted hurting her, regretted getting caught. He'd been playing the wounded husband, waiting for her to fold so he could regain full ship. In that moment, her laugh vanished. The grief remained, the exhaustion lingered, the social and financial still weighed heavy, but her resolve hard and unbreakable. She was not backing down. She was not sacrificing her safety to save a fake bear her pride. She saved the call to her cloud drive, locked it in a password-protected folder. Update to Kara. "I have new evidence. Critical evidence." Lowest point was finally behind her. She'd lost her marriage, lost her friend group's support, lost the perfect years building. She had no ones left about Ethan, hope that he could change. No more shame in choosing herself over a broken relationship. All internal support had frayed, but first time since the wedding night, she was no save a marriage. For her freedom. As she stared at the dark, rainy street, one terrifying thought settled in her mind. Ethan had no idea how he estimated her. That recorded conversation with a crack in his perfect facade, the weapon that could every lie he'd told. And when the hearing arrived, only ready to use it. The morning after she captured Ethan's damning recording, Lila woke different. The heavy fog of self-doubt that had clung to her for weeks was finally gone. She still felt the grief of her shattered marriage, the sting of social judgment, and the weight of upcoming court pressure, but she no longer felt powerless. For the first time since that violent wedding night fight, she held tangible proof of who Ethan truly was behind his charming public mask. She arrived at attorney Kara Bennett's office early, phone clutched tight in her hand, ready to turn over her new evidence. Kara listened to the recorded call in silence, her expression sharpening with every arrogant word Ethan spoke. When the audio ended, she leaned forward across her desk, eyes sharp with professional certainty. "This changes everything," Kara said firmly. "Prior testimony and neighbor witness accounts show a pattern of conflict. But this recording exposes his deliberate manipulation. It proves his remorse was fake, that he's been banking on your shame to make you surrender. A judge will hear this. This is game-changing. Kara immediately restructured their entire case strategy. Instead of relying solely on Rita's witness statement and Marissa's anonymous background account, they would lead with Ethan's own words. The audio would dismantle his victim narrative before he even stepped foot in the courtroom. Still, Kara warned Lila not to grow overconfident. Ethan was crafty, well-spoken, and practiced at painting himself as reasonable and wrong. He would find ways to deflect, minimize, and doubt the recording's context. Before leaving the office, Lila made another quiet, intentional decision. She would return to the townhouse one final time to collect her remaining personal belongings. She refused to let fear keep her from reclaiming what was hers. Robert insisted on accompanying. His steady, grounded presence a quiet shield against whatever confrontation might await. The townhouse felt frozen in the ghost of their failed fairy. The string lights still hung above the couch. The wedding reception centerpiece sat dusty on the coffee table, and the faint scent of the vanilla candles they'd burned on their wedding day still lingered in the air. It all looked like the perfect newlywed home Ethan continued to describe to their friends. But to Lila, every corner reeked of lies and suppressed. Ethan was home when they arrived. He stood in the kitchen, leaning against the counter with a coffee mug in hand, his bandaged forearm fully healed. No visible trace of the injury he'd dramatized for weeks. For a split second, he slipped back into his gentle, apologetic act, attempting to engage Lila in soft, casual conversation. "You don't have to do this." Eyes locking on hers. "We can still fix this." Lila didn't flinch, didn't fall for the again. "There's nothing to Ethan. I'm just here for my..." Her cold, unyielding tone caught him hard. He was used to her wavering, used to her clinging to the last fragments of their broken future. When he realized she was no longer susceptible to his manipulation, his mask slipped instantly, his tightened, his eye hardened, and the charming, remorseful husband facade vanished. He stormed across the living room, voice rising. "You're really going with this? Ruining both our lives because of one stupid fight? You're selfish. So unbelievably..." Robert stepped smoothly between them, calm, unshaken, his posture creating an uncrossable boundary. "Keep your distance. She's here for her property only. No conversation, no..." For the first time in their entire relationship, Lila watched Ethan lose control in front of a witness. He didn't hold back his temper, didn't temper his words for outward perception. He paced aggressively, ranting at unfairness, about how Lila was destroying his reputation, about how she would regret ruining their marriage over a mistake. His voice boomed through the quiet townhouse, loud enough that Rita downstairs would undoubtedly hear every word. Lila hacked steadily, unfazed. Every angry accusation only reinforced the truth in her recording. This was his real self, volatile, entitled, incapable of takeability. This was the... By the time she zipped her suitcase, Ethan's rage had burned into bitter... He stood by the front door, eyes blazing, and issued his cut. "You think that little recording is to win you the case?" he sneered. "I have friends in administration, I have cases lined up, and I have a documented injury. You walk into that hearing trying to destroy me, and I will back. I'll make sure everyone knows exactly..." Lila grabbed her suitcase, lifted her chin, and met his glare without a single flicker of fear. "Judge, hear everything. Every lie you told, every threat you made, every time you lost control, more." She walked out the front door without looking back, Robert following closely behind her. The second the door clicked shut behind them, Lila felt a massive weight from her chest. She was no longer running from conflict, no hiding from the truth, no longer trying to preserve a marriage that had only ever built on her blind hope and his kiss. Downstairs, Rita stood at her window, having heard every shout word from the floor above. She'd witnessed Ethan's unprovoked fear firsthand this time. No more guessing, ambiguity. That night, she texted Lila a short, firm message. "I heard everything. I'm fully ready to testify. Stay silent anymore." The balance of it officially shifted. For weeks, Ethan had controlled the narrative, manipulated their friends, and pressed into submission. Now Lila held the evidence, the witness support, and the unbreakable fight back. But as she loaded her case into her father's truck, she knew Ethan's fight was inevitable. Cornered and desperate, he would pull out every last trick he had to ruin the hearing arrived. In the days leading up to the restraining order hearing, The quiet before the storm settled over Lila's life. There were no more explosive late-night arguments, no more vague anonymous texts, no more public social media smear campaigns. Ethan had gone unnervingly silent. To anyone outside their tight legal conflict, he looked calm, collected and unfairly wronged, patiently waiting for the court to clear his name. Lila knew better. She had seen his unbridled anger up close, heard his threats, and understood exactly what this sudden silence meant. He was conserving his energy for one final, devastating strike in the courtroom. With her evidence locked securely in place, and Rita's testimony fully committed, Lila and Kara spent every evening refining their case. They organized text logs, timestamped the audio recording, compiled Marissa's anonymous witness statement, and drafted every line of Lila's testimony to keep her steady, honest and unshakable under cross-examination. Kara repeatedly emphasized one critical truth. Ethan's greatest weapon had always been his ability to control other people's perception of reality. In court, that power would finally be stripped away. Slowly but surely, the false narrative Ethan had built over weeks began to crumble. Rita's new first-hand account of his explosive outburst during Lila's belongings pickup changed everything. The elderly neighbor no longer offered cautious statements. She had heard Ethan's unprovoked rage with her own ears, witnessed his intentional intimidation, and was ready to swear under oath that Lila had acted only in self-defense from the very start of the conflict. Even within their mutual friend group, cracks began to show in Ethan's perfect victim story. A few wedding guests who had blindly sided with him started reaching out to Lila privately. They admitted they'd only heard Ethan's version of events, had bought his charm act, and felt deeply unsettled after hearing fragments of his true behavior. One former acquaintance forwarded Lila a thread from their group where Ethan had been privately mocking her and laughing about how easy it was to manipulate their friends. For the first time since the wedding night, Lila gained quiet, unofficial allies. People were finally starting to see the man behind the mask, and the social tide that had crushed her for weeks began to gently. But Ethan was not going down without. 3 days before Lila received an official court notification that stopped her. Ethan had filed a counterclaim for personal injury damages. He was suing her for the minor forearm laceration she'd inflicted during her self-defense response on their. His legal argument was simple, ruthless, and perfectly calculated for court. He claimed unprovoked domestic assault, accused Lila of excessiveness, and framed his entire angry outburst as a terrified reaction to being. The move was his final, ultimate. If the judge ruled against her, Lila would not only lose her restraining order, she would be ordered to pay Ethan compensatory damages, have an official assault record on her file, and be permanently branded as the violent, unstable spouse in every officialment. "He's trying to scare you," Kara explained firmly during an emergency evening call, sensing Lila's panic. "He knows his verbal threats aren't anymore, so he's using the legal system itself. This counterclaim is aggressive, but it's desperate. He has no witness proof to back his claim, only his own injured arm and his policy." Lila understood logic, but the weight of the consequence still settled heavy. If she lost, her career at the medical clinic could be jeopardized. Her clean background check, her stable employment, her future, all of it could be destroyed in a single. She would pay a steep personal price for choosing to defend herself. That night, she sat alone on her childhood bedroom balcony, staring out at the dark suburban rooftops, and made her final choice. She would not back down. She would not settle for a quiet truce punishment. She would step that courtroom, face Ethan's counterclaim head-on, and fight for the truth no matter what personal. Her parents found her side later, quiet. Robert did not sugarcoat the risk, but he stood for her. Self-defense isn't a crime. The truth doesn't need to be perfect to be real. You just need to tell it. Carol, finally letting go of her last hope reconciliation, squeezed Lila's hand and offered unwavering support. No more what-ifs, no more grief broken marriage, only belief in her daughter's right to. On the eve of the hearing, all the pieces finally fell into place. Lila had her recorded audio proof, a credible new witness in Rita, background evidence of Ethan's return of anger, and a small but loyal group of allies now saw the truth. Ethan had his polished charm, his cryptid victim narrative, and his last-ditch counterclaim destroy her. The blurred, confusing conflict of the pawn. There was no middle ground, no room for misunderstanding, no possibility of peaceful compromise. Tomorrow, in front of a judge, the fight would be fought. The lies would either stand or collapse. Lila would either reclaim her life or be buried under Ethan's. As she shut her eyes to sleep, Her mind was no longer filled with fear. It was filled with certainty. After weeks of running, hiding, doubting, and fighting, the moment of ultimate was finally here, and the outcome would reach of her life. The morning of the restraining order hearing arrived gray and sharp, a cold Seattle winter light filtering through the tall courthouse windows. Lila dressed simply, in a neutral blazer and tidy slacks, her hair pulled back clean, no makeup to soften the tension in her face. She didn't want to look polished or perfect for the judge. She wanted to look honest, ordinary, steady, and human after weeks of being reduced to a villain or a victim in other people's stories. Her parents sat quietly behind her in the wooden courtroom benches, Mia beside them, all three offering silent, unshakable support. When Ethan walked in moments later, the contrast was impossible to miss. He wore a tailored button-down, his hair neatly styled, the faint scar on his forearm visible above his sleeve, a deliberate visual reminder of his injury. He scanned the room with calm, confident eyes, nodding politely at the court clerk, projecting the image of a reasonable, wronged husband forced to defend himself against an unstable spouse. The second the judge took her seat and called the case to order, the room fell completely silent. Every small sound amplified. The rustle of paper, the click of the court recorder, the quiet inhale of everyone present. This was the moment every prior fight, every hidden lie, every manipulated conversation had been building toward. Ethan's attorney spoke first, laying out his counterclaim with practiced precision. He painted a devastating one-sided picture of the wedding night fight, a stressed, exhausted Ethan trying to resolve honest wedding budget tensions, only to be ambushed by an irritable, unhinged Lila who lashed out physically without warning. He emphasized the documented arm injury, the police report with conflicting statements, and argued Lila's self-defense claim was nothing more than a desperate excuse for unprovoked domestic violence. When Ethan took the witness stand, his performance was flawless. His voice stayed steady and soft, his expressions measured and remorseful. He teared up slightly, describing the shock of being attacked days after his wedding, spoke of his shattered hopes for a peaceful marriage, and claimed he'd spent weeks terrified of Lila's unpredictable. He framed every one of his angry outbursts as a natural reaction to her, every threat as a stressed mistake he deeply. For a long, terrifying stretch of time, Lila watched the court lean toward him. The judge listened intently, no visible bias, and Lila's throat tightened with old. He was so good at twisting truth into something, so good at making her look like the irrational destructive. Then Kara stepped forward to dismantle every lie, piece by piece. She called Rita Gomez to the stand. The elderly neighbor walked slowly to the chair, hands steady despite her quietness, and spoke with unwavering. She testified to the sequence of sounds she'd heard through the floorboard. Ethan's raised voice, his fast advancing footsteps, the violent scuffle, and Lila's defensive movement only after the threat began. She confirmed she'd heard Ethan provoked, furious outburst during Lila's belongings pickup weeks later, eliminating any remaining doubt about who held the power. Rita's neutrality was her. She was no best friend, no grieving family member, no Jill's lover, just a retired teacher who'd heard the truth with no stake in either side. Her calm, factual testimony stripped Ethan's victim activity. But the true turning point came when Kara entered the audio recording. The courtroom speakers crackled to life, and Ethan's own voice filled the room, cold, arrogant, unremorseful, mocking Lila's grief, bragging about manipulating their friends, dismissing his behavior as trivial, and her fear as over-emotional drama. Every polite word he'd spoken in court moments earlier shattered against the cruel certainty of his. Color drained from Ethan's. His composure cracked for the first. He shifted nervously in his seat, jaw tight, eyes darting across the room as the full weight of his deception played louder. The perfect grieving husband persona completely, leaving only the angry, manipulative man married. Kara followed with Marissa's statement, laying out Ethan's years-long pattern of explosive anger, emotional control, and post-breakup character assassination. She wove every piece of evidence together into a timeline. This was not a one-time take. This was a repeated cycle of charm, rage, and manipulation that Lila aped. When Lila took the stand, she didn't rely on ears. She spoke quietly and honestly. She described the buildup of tension, the exact moment Ethan acted to strike, the instinctive self-defense father had taught her, and the terror of realizing the man she'd trusted entirely capable of violence. She had her own flaws, her willful ignorance of red flags, her desperate desire for broken marriage, doubt. She did not see herself as perfect. She simply told the truth. After closing arguments, The courtroom fell into a heavy, breathless silence while the evidence stretched like hours. Ethan sat rigid in his chair, his earlier calm vanished. Her gaze forward, unflinching. Ready to accept any outcome, but no truth. The judge finally spoke, her rule decisive. She dismissed Ethan's personal injury counterclaim in full, stating Lila's actions constituted justified self-defense against an imminent physical threat. She gave a full restraining order, prohibiting Ethan from contacting Lila, approaching her residence or workplace, or her any form. She closed by noting the disturbing pattern of manipulative and aggressive behavior revealed in the evidence, emphasizing that emotional and physical intimidation has in any marriage. Relief crashed over Lila in a overwhelming wave. Her hands trembled for the first time all morning, tears stinging her eyes, not but of release. The lies were finally broken. The narrative Ethan controlled for weeks was dead. She had won her safety, her reputation, and her truth. Ethan left the courtroom without a single glance in her direction. His head hung low, his public reputation damaged. But as Lila stood to leave, Kara's quiet voice pulled her back to reality. The restraining order was final, the counterclaim dismissed. Far from over. Joint finances remained tangled, the lease still needed dissolution, and the legal fallout of their broken marriage lingered for months to come. The battle was won. The war to reef had only just begun. The courthouse doors clicked shut behind Lila, and the crisp Seattle winter air hit her face, sharp and clean. For the first time in 31 days, exactly 1 month since she'd walked down the aisle and said, "I do," Lila Marlowe felt unshackled. The weight of Ethan's lies, his smear campaign, his threats, and his false victimhood had finally lifted off her shoulders. The court victory was not a glamorous celebratory win. It was quiet, gritty, and hard-earned, the kind of victory that doesn't make the past disappear, but finally lets the future start breathing. Her parents and Mia walked beside her, no one rushing to speak. There were no cheers, no triumphant hugs, no loud exclamations of justice served. They all knew better. Winning the restraining order had secured her safety, but the messy, ordinary aftermath of a broken marriage still waited for her. Tangled finances, a shared townhouse lease, unresolved wedding debt, and the quiet grief of a future completely erased. These were the unglamorous battles no courtroom ruling could instantly fix. In the weeks following the hearing, Lila methodically untangled every thread of the life she'd briefly shared with Ethan. Working patiently with Kara, she finalized the lease termination, negotiated a fair split of the remaining wedding vendor balances, and closed their joint credit card account for good. Ethan did not fight the financial settlement. Broken and publicly discredited after the court ruling, he had lost the will and the credibility to keep waging war. He signed every document without pushback, his only priority cutting all ties and salvaging what little remained of his damaged reputation among their mutual friends. The social fallout slowly settled. The friend group that had once abandoned her gradually learned the full truth. More people reached out with quiet apologies, admitting they'd blindly believed Ethan's charming lies and unfairly judged. Lila accepted the apologies calmly, but she did not rush to rebuild those fractured friendships. She'd learned a brutal, necessary loyalty that depends on a perfect narrative, or that abandons you in your darkest moment, was never real loyalty to begin. She kept Mia, her family, and a small circle of genuine supporters, and let the rest fade away peacefully. Carol's quiet grief finally softened into unwavering. One evening, while folding laundry together at the family home, her mother paused, voice gentle and unreserved. "I kept hoping you could fix the marriage because I wanted your happy ending. But I was wrong. Your happy ending isn't a perfect wedding. It's you being safe, whole, and true." That single statement closed the last small rift between them, erasing every prior argument about reconciliation and second. Robert never said, "I told." He simply stood beside her through every tedious legal, reminding her that self-defense and choosing herself was never. The quiet backyard lessons he'd taught her, once a strange, unnecessary, had become the foundation of her. 2 months after the hearing, Lila moved into a small sunlit apartment in a quiet, tree-lined suburban neighborhood. It had no fancy string lights, no wedding leftovers, no ghostly echoes of broken promises. It was simply hers. She unpacked her clothes, her books, small, meaningful piece of decor, and slowly built a space that felt safe, calm, and her own. On any evening, exactly 2 months to the day after that violent night fight, Lila sat by her new living room window and watched the rain stress. The scene mirrored the opening of her nightmare, the same gray Pacific Northwest rain, the same soft door lighting, But there were no crumpled wedding receipts scattered across a table, no simmering rage to erupt, no man she'd trust. There was only quiet. She thought back to the girl who'd married Ethan 3 days into a failed marriage, blinded by love and desperate. That girl had believed marriage was everything, that commitment erased flaws, that love could overwrite. The woman sitting in the new apartment better now. She knew love without respect was hollow, that charm without intent dangerous, and that walking away from home never failure was courage. Lost her marriage, her short-lived newlywed dream, and the naive optimism carried for years. But she had gained something precious, trust. She could now recognize red flags, value her own safety of social approval, and choose herself with aim. She was no longer defined by her relationship status, no longer desperate to prove her marriage was perfect, no longer willing to sacrifice her peace for happiness. Ethan faded completely. He relocated to a different suburb, cut ties with most of her mutual acquaintances, no profile. No further incident aggression surfaced, but Lila did not waste time changed. She no longer carried responsibility for his choices, his anger, his regrets. Her only job was to protect what she'd built. Lila's story did not end with a grand sin ever after. There were no sudden miracles, no easy fixes, no perfect turnaround. Some days she still grieved the future she'd once imagined. Some days she still felt the echo of that old fear. But every day she grew stronger, more grounded, more worth. As she turned off the living room lamp and settled into her safe home for the night, Lila smiled herself. Her marriage had ended in disaster 3 days, but her real life, the one built on strength, self-respect, and hard-won freedom, was truly beginning.